Welcome to Book Carnival. My name is Anne, and tonight we're delighted to be talking to Doug Lyle, DP Lyle, as he's known when he's publishing, and his latest book, The OC. Before I turn it over to Doug, because he always has lots of good things to tell us, both about the books and life in general, I was reading up on him, and he has won so many awards, it would take me quite a while to read all of them. But the larger ones that I see that jump out at me, the Macavity, the Seamus, the Anthony. He's best-selling on Amazon, #1. He's been USA Best Book Awards a couple of times at least. And he's written nonfiction, which has been very popular, as well as his fiction books. But it was also interesting to find that he's helped with a lot of programs, and I remember many of them very fondly. Law and Order, CSI, Miami, Diagnosis Murder, Monk, Judging Amy, Peacemakers, Cold Case, and Women's Murder Club, The Glades, and Pretty Little Liars. So that's a lot of exposure to a lot of good television. And we'll be interested in knowing what words of wisdom you shred out to those. So I'm going to turn it over to Doug. Let's welcome DP Lyle with his latest book, The OC, which I have in front of me and will demonstrate. Look at that. Isn't that
there
beautiful?
you go.
Very pretty.
Ocean View does great jobs with the covers. They're fantastic with that. They create a great product. Very good.
They
book.
do.
Yes,
and
they do.
As a bookseller, I love bright covers because so many of them are dark because they're mysteries.
Right.
But those bright ones stand out and people can find them very easily. So Doug, what do you want to tell us about the OC and your writing process in general?
Well, thank you for having me, Anne. Always a pleasure. I love you to death. And, you all know Anne. I mean, some of you don't because you're not from here, being up in the Seattle area and being in Pennsylvania. But Anne is such a great friend to the writers here in Orange County and the writers really all over. And she's always been very supportive and just, we love her to death. And I hope she loves us. But I know she does. I don't have to ask that. That's her existence. She's got a great bookstore. And it's just great to be here and talk about all of this stuff. The OC is the 5th in the Jake Longley series. And it's interesting. You talk about the bright colors of the covers. The original one, Deep Six, actually had a different color cover that was more traditional when we first published it in hardback. But when we came out with the paperback, we decided we had a theme going here and we wanted to use bright colors. So Deep Six changed to bright red for the paperback and for the little logo on the ebook. And then after that, they've all kind of had that primary color, more simplistic Art Deco, if you will, like covers, because they're comedic. Mm-hmm. Comedy has a place in thrillers anyway. You have to have those moments where the viewer or the reader can decompress. You can't just have breakneck speed all the time because it wears people out. It's like, oh my God, I need to, lay down for a minute. Can you stop the movie? Can you put this book aside? So you have to have that comic relief. People ask about that a lot, and I think the classic example is James Bond. Remember the original Bond movies, how there was always that little moment where Bond said something funny and, just weird. Like I remember he shot someone with a spear gun. He said he got the point. If that kind of understated British humor, of course, was for them. But the point is that humor really decompresses from high intensity. They're both high emotions, but they're different, and it allows you to take a breath. I always read a lot of humor. I read Mark Twain, of course, growing up. I read a lot of Will Rogers. I read a guy named Louis Grizzard, who's a Southern humorist. He's hysterical. I always read a lot of that. And I always liked comedies, Lucy. My God. the greatest comedian that ever lived by far. Nobody's close to Lucy. Um, and grew up with comedies. Grew up with that and Red Skelton and Gleason and all this. And so I always liked humor. And I think Melinda, my sister here, can tell you that we grew up in a funny family. We laughed about everything. Everything was goofy. My mother was just above the level where they lock you up. I mean, she was out of her mind most of the time, but she never had a bad day, really. She always had, her life was a party all the time. Whatever was going on was the best thing in the world. So we kind of grew up around that kind of stuff. But I wrote thrillers and I wrote mysteries and I wrote darker stuff and all of that. And I always wanted to write humor. In reading humor, I read, of course, Carl Hyacin. I read Tim Mulaney, and a lot of humor stuff like that. And so I always liked that. And I decided, why don't you just do this? Just see if you can do this. And so I had a vague idea for Jake. I knew I wanted him to be a idiot. You know, I wanted him to be an ex Major League Baseball player. I wanted him to not have money worries and not be, but I wanted him to be one of those guys, and you've known people like this that everybody gravitates to. Everybody likes Jake. He's non-threatening, he's non-competitive, he's just laid back, he's type B. He'd rather prop his feet up with a beer than do anything. And he's one of those guys. And everybody likes it. But other than that, I didn't really know him. And I didn't really know where this story was going. And I had one scene in mind, and it's the opening scene to Deep Six. And I said, just sit down and write it. Just sit down and write a scene. Now, you talk about technique and all that. Before this, I had always outlined my books. I never finished an outline, but I always started one, and I'd get about 75% through it, and I'd get bored with the outline, and I'd just start writing because now I knew where it was going to go. But it was kind of learning the story along the way. But this one, I said, nah, just write this scene and see what happens. Because the scene kept bugging me. So I wrote the scene, and then, oh, okay. And then that would happen. Oh, and then that would happen. And then that would happen. The next thing you know, I'm 40,000, words into it. And I've created characters. I got dead people. I got bad people. I got, other characters. Jake's father, Pancake, Nicole appears, and all of this stuff. My cadre of 4 characters that populate this thing, Jake and Nicole and Pancake and Ray, kind of appeared. And then the story took on. And by the time, it always happens 100% of the time. And you know this. You start writing, you get 50,000 words in, you say, this is stupid. This is not working. You do not know what you're doing. You're a fraud. Throw this garbage away and go do something else. It always happens. That is my 22nd book. It's never failed. But the difference is after the first couple, you say, come on, you idiot. You've been here before. Just keep moving forward. It will all work out. And so I kind of did that and went on and moved along. And then at the end, I loved the book. I mean, I loved the story. I loved everything about it. So I said, okay, I got some other ideas for these characters. And so now the 5 books into it. Now, most of them are set in the Gulf Coast. Deep Six was in the Gulf Shores, Pensacola, along that area. A-List was set in New Orleans. Um, Sunshine State, well, duh, it was set in Florida in an imaginary town. And then Rigged was set in Fairhope, around Fairhope, which is in just east of Mobile and just west of Mobile on the Mobile Bay. And if you ever get down that way, go to Fairhope. It's one of the greatest cities you'll ever go in your life. It's fantastic. They call it the Carmel of the South. It's artsy. It's got a great bookstore. It's got great restaurants and bars and fun people. And it's just cool. So I set it there. But I always wanted to set one here in Orange County. I always wanted to write a book set here at home. And I just never really had the vehicle to do it. But this suddenly, I just said, well, Nicole's for 2 or 3 books has been working on a screenplay. What happens if our Uncle Charles, who is A-list, high dollar, high mega producer, decides to produce her story? And that's the excuse to get them to the West Coast. Plus, from the Jump Street, I always had the very first book. I always had Nicole have a condo here in Newport Beach. Now, whether that was clairvoyant or not, I don't know, but I always had one. But her condo's right next to the cannery. You know, the strip of condos there. That's exactly where I put it. Okay. And so, because, I hung out there for many, 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 many times when I was younger and running around crazy. I said it. I said I had them come out here, and I said, well, they'll take a couple of weeks vacation before they go up to L.A. to start the shooting of the screenplay, because to me, shooting of the screenplay is dull and boring and time consuming. I've been on sets before, and it's dull and boring and time consuming. So then things happen. A friend of hers has picked up a stalker, and she has no idea who it is. No idea at all. There's been no direct communication. There's only been communication, but there's been no face to face. So she doesn't know who this person is, doesn't have a clue. And she doesn't take it seriously. Megan is her friend. She is a local TV star, if you will. Think, PBS station, that kind of thing. And so she's a little local. She does fluff stories and a little bit of news and a little bit of this and a little bit of whatever, like they usually do in those small stations. And she's got a good following and people like her, and she's very personable and pretty and, all that stuff. So this is just a fan. Well, when Jake and Nicole hear about this, they say, oh, I don't know. There's some unusual stuff here. Oh, no, you're just overreacting. It's no big deal. Well, you know where this is going. The snowball starts rolling and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And of course, Ray and Pancake have to come out. And then, so there's scenes in this story that are actually in the cannery, in the Blue Water Grill there right next to it, at Rothschild's in Corona del Mar, probably the best restaurant in Orange County. Uh, uh, different places around. Ortega Highway plays into it because, well, Orange County, Ortega Highway, if you want to kill somebody or dispose of a body, Ortega Highway is where to go. In fact, people kill themselves on Ortega Highway all the time by accident. They get hit by a motorcycle doing a buck 20. If you ever driven down it, you know what I mean. That's the reason I said it here. And I wanted it to be here. And so this was planned with malice and a forethought.
Does it, we're delighted that you planned one here, but you still needed your helpers from back south.
Right.
Back.
Yeah.
And how did they adjust to working out here?
Well, Ray adjusts to everything quickly. Ray is Jake's father, and Ray has some military background that has to do with black ops and CIA stuff. Nobody really knows. Not even Jake knows what Ray really did during his combat activity or whatever he did. Nobody really knows. But now he's a private investigator, and Ray is no nonsense. Ray is in your face. Ray will figure things out and fix the problem. Pancake, who does work for Ray and grew up with Jake, they go back to childhood. Pancake is about 6'5" and 280 with red hair and the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet until you piss him off. And then he will throw you into a wall or throw you through a wall. But also, he's not just a big dumb oaf. He's very smart and he's very computer savvy. So he does all the computer work for Ray, and Ray does the wet work, if you will. And between the two of them, they're a formidable pair. Well, obviously, Ray and Pancake don't understand why Jake won't work for them. And Jake says, I've got a job. And it's like, what is it? Well, he owns a bar and a restaurant on the beach in Gulf Shores, and that's really all he cares about. And he doesn't really do anything there because he's got Carla Martinez, his manager, who runs everything. So Jake really doesn't have anything to do, and he likes it that way. And so, but regardless of how it is, he always gets drugged into Ray's world in these goofy things. And now he drags Ray into this. The Ray and Pancake come out, and the next thing now it gets serious. Now it gets serious. But Jake always has an odd take on everything. It's always, well, yeah, okay. What about this and what about that? And is this really a big deal or is that not a big deal or whatever? And Nicole is kind of the buffer in between the two. Very beautiful, the typical Orange County blonde ex-actress, but happens to be the 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 niece of a mega producer and the daughter of another producer and a writer and all this stuff. So she grew up in Hollywood, tried all the acting thing, hated it, got out, didn't have anything to do with it. But she's smart and she doesn't take any crap from Jake. And I've been asked many times, the dynamic between those two, we really like it because they're always jousting with each other. They're always kind of poking at each other, especially Nicole with Jake. But Jake, as she said, is a very target-rich environment. There's a lot to poke there. And so she stays on him all the time and is always giving him grief. And they say, well, yeah, how did you come up with that? And I didn't know. I didn't really know. But by about the third book, I figured it out. It's because I grew up watching Tracy and Hepburn. And this is Tracy and Hepburn. And those comedies that they did, and I always tell people, if you really want to know, watch Adam's Rib. It's probably the best movie they ever made together. And it is laugh out loud funny. But the dynamic is they were on an equal level. Mm-hmm. And she was smarter than him. Okay. And it made for a great dynamic there. And if you go through comedy that I grew up with, Lucy and Desi were that way. Okay. Ralph and Alice absolutely were that way. And of course, Nick and Nora Charles from the old movies there. And then more modern times, Sam and Diane. They had that dynamic, from Cheers. They had that dynamic, and I liked that dynamic where they both had their assets and they both had their foibles, and they could joust with each other on an equal level. And I like that. And so that's kind of where it came from. And it came organically. It just came from, stuff I'd watched as a kid. And, but when someone finally asked me, it's like, oh, okay. I like that, and I like that dynamic. I've always liked that. But if you go back to my Dub Walker series, he had an ex-wife with benefits named Claire, and they were kind of that way. Sam, the Samantha Cody series, no, Sam was different. She was a cop and an ex-professional boxer. She just knocked you out. But so apparently that dynamic has been brewing in there for a while. So that's kind of where it came from. Somebody said, how did you come up with your colorful character names? Well, I'm assuming that you're asking about Pancake. Yeah. Well, when I grew up playing Little League Baseball, I had a coach for a couple of years. And I do not know his name because everybody called him Breadman. That was his nickname. And for short, they called him Bread. And I played against a coach that I do not know his name that was known as Buttermilk. And everybody just called him Milk. So only in the South can your nickname have a nickname. And so Pancake because what he was an offensive lineman. He played football. He was very, very good because, well, he's huge and he's aggressive and he's nasty and he will flatten you. And pancake blocks are where you flatten the guy. So he got his nickname Pancake from playing high school football because he would pancake so many people. People think it's because he would eat so many pancakes. Well, he can. And anybody who's read the books knows that Pancake eats all the time. His whole life revolves around what I'm going to eat next. And he eats prodigiously, So it kind of fit. So that's where the names come from. But, it's interesting. Character names are so important. I remember, many years ago now, I was at the Maui Writers Conference, which was one of the great conferences ever created, maybe the best ever created. And it was always at the Grand Wailea on Maui, and it was so well done and so perfect. And one of the guest was Elmore Leonard, and we were having a little cocktail party, and he was kind of sitting over there, and I went over, sat down with him, and we started talking. And that actually happened twice. So I had about 2 45-minute sit downs one-on-one with Elmore Leonard just talking. And I'm going to tell you, he and James Lee Burke are my two favorite authors all time ever. And to do that was like, I was like a kid in a candy shop. And so we talked about writing, we talked about characters, we talked about this, we talked about that. And he's such a great guy and so personal, or was a great guy. I really miss that he's not around writing his stories. And I always tell writers, you want to learn to write, read Elmore Leonard. He leaves out the part people skip, and everybody needs to learn that. So I asked him, I said, all your characters, they're all scumbags. There's none that have social redeeming values, really. I mean, even the heroes are criminals, for Christ's sakes. And I said, do you, I don't do this, but do you do anything like character sketches or stuff like that? And he said, nah, I don't do anything like that. He said, what I do is it may take me a week or two or a month or two, but I come up with the name. And once I know the name, I know the character. And it was like, brilliant. Of course. Of course. And what he meant is he lived with the character in his head until he knew them. And when he knew them, he knew what their name was. And only then did he know the character. So names are so important. And I know, and I bet every writer's had this thing. I'm writing stories and you have a character that appears and then doesn't appear again till maybe the middle or the second, third of the book or something like this. And you go on and da 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 da. By the end of the book, you finish it. And I write fast and then I go back and rewrite. And you start reading and you say, who the hell is Martha? Well, Martha became, Betty. Because halfway through the book, you knew her better and you knew how she fit in the story better. And she's not a Martha anymore. She's a Betty. And there's a difference. Okay. So that's the importance of naming. But Elmore Leonard hit that nail square on the head. And so always have your protagonist and your antagonist have short names because you're going to type them a lot. Don't make them Bartholomew.
Another
you're going to type them a lot. Make them short. Jake. Ray, minor characters can be that. But the other thing I learned from Elmore Leonard is minor characters. He has so many characters that come and go in his stories, and he always gives them great names, and he always makes them real. And so people say, well, if a character's only going to be there for one scene, you don't have to give them a name. Yes, you do, because it defines who they are. And so I love to write minor characters because you can do anything with them. They're not going to be around later. The problem with writing a series is you can't change the character that much. And whatever you do in the first book of the series, whatever you make them look like, whatever you make them do, whatever you make their personality, sorry, you're stuck with it. You can't change it. They talk about character arc and all that, and that's fine for a one-off book. But if you're writing a series, you cannot have a huge character arc. You can't do it because the characters will change too much and they will come out of the end of the tube in each story differently and pretty soon they're not recognizable anymore. And readers don't want that. James Bond is James Bond. Jack Reacher is Jack Reacher. Now they're presented with challenges and they may learn and grow and develop new skills, but at heart, they're the same people. And if you change them too much, people don't recognize them and they'll react. They'll send you nasty emails.
Someone else asked if your characters are based on people you know or have known.
Not really. I think it's kind of a conglomeration of people. I've had a couple of friends that were as laid back as Jake. One was so much more laid back. We call him Gentle Ben. He was so much more laid back that he wouldn't have done even what Jake does. Great, loved him. Great guy. And other friends have been a lot more type B than me, and so they're laid back. And so I kind of like that. I wish I could be more type B sometimes. Overall not, but sometimes you just feel, let it go, relax. It's not that big of a deal. No, let's fix this. No, let's fix it. Let's fix this today. No, today. Let's do this right now. And that's the way you do it. But I guess it gets you through life. And practicing cardiology for the last 50 years, you better be able to fix it right now. But still, that type B personality always fascinates me. In one way, it's infuriating, and the other way, I'm very envious.
Do you find that you have funny parts in your book, but you have very serious parts
Yes.
too, because you want to get to the problem and
Right.
deal with it, and you put your characters through some harrowing things at times.
Yes. We have to do that for a thriller. Yeah.
Right. And how do you talk about how the humor comes to you? How do you work yourself up for that to get that across?
But the thrillers were what I wrote before, and then I have my Kane Harper series that is not funny at all. It's down and dirty, and it's not for the faint of heart. But that part is not. You have to do that. You have to have a story, but it's almost as how you look at it. You have to step to the side and look at it differently. But there's that humor, that humor that comes in stressful situations. They always say doctors and nurses and cops are very similar because they all have gallows humor, that dark humor. And I want to tell you, everything, even the most tragic of situations, or almost all of the most tragic of situations, the most stressful situations you can come up with in medicine, they're funny. There's funny element to this. Really, this is hysterical, man. You keep it to yourself until later when you're talking to another doctor. Well, that was unbelievable. What could you believe? But the point is, and that's why doctors don't tell stories at cocktail parties, because everybody else is horrified. You're laughing at that. Oh, you had to be there. It was really very funny. But there's some truth to that. So you do that, and in this one, it's about stalking. It's about celebrity stalking, a very serious problem. And I've known, quote, celebrities, some way up the food chain, some not so up the food chain, people that have done modeling or acting or of some substance, even writers, and who have had stalkers, or at least have had people that made them uncomfortable, that they wouldn't disappear. And probably everybody's had that, at least on some level. Hopefully you haven't, but probably everybody's had someone who was just a little too clingy, a little too pushy, a little too want to get too close, a little too that. Everybody's kind of had that. Well, when you move that on up the level of anxiety, if you will, it can become scary. It can become absolutely scary. And I always go back to the case of Rebecca Schaefer, remember, that was on Mork and Mindy, and this guy found her. She didn't even really know he existed, and he kills her, and I can, and you read about this. Of course, you read about it, it's always Hollywood people because they make the news, but people breaking into people's houses and stuff, and I've known a couple of actresses that's actually happened to. People break into their house, jump in the fence, it's happened to everybody, both men and women. It seems to be that women are more vulnerable. Maybe they're afraid to approach men, but there's been a lot that have been. I don't know why, but they lock on to this obsession and they won't let go. Now, most of the time, the person knows who's stalking them because they confront them face to face. They go to where they are. They want to get close to them. Now, that's not always true. So what happens if someone is stalking you and they're upping the ante and you have no idea who they are? That they're not only sending you presents and leaving stuff at your house and breaking into your house and sending you notes, both written and electronically, and all of this, and you have, and the danger is escalating day by day. What on earth do you do about that? Where do you hide? Where do you hide? What do you do? And at first, I think most people don't understand the danger that they're in, and they don't understand the depth of where this can go. Uh, People get into cars that they shouldn't get into, and they let people put bindings and handcuffs on them. And when the idea thing is to kick them in some vulnerable spot, scratch their eyes out, and run like hell and scream like a banshee. But you don't do it. And how many stories have you heard like that? Because you're thinking, no, this couldn't be that. But it is that. And same way with stalkers. It is that. And but are you overreacting? Are you overreading the situation? And that's human. That's human nature, because you don't want to go there, number one, mentally, and number two, am I going to look like an idiot if I start screaming and yelling and ranting and raving and all this stuff? People are going to think I'm crazy. And trust me, that's happened too.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you go? Where do you go? And to me, that is such a personal fear. And if you think about thrillers, they're built on fear. They're built on fear. Something has to scare that person on such a visceral level. And that is the thrill for the reader, because it's, oh, thank God it's not me. And how are they going to get out of this? What are they going to do? And therein lies the mystery and the thrill.
Well, and don't you find that so often women, particularly, who seem to be the most vulnerable, aren't always believed or taken seriously?
Oh, sure. For that very reason. No, you're overreading this. He just got an infatuation, and and it's not that big of a deal. Which, of course, was Megan's take on this through the story. As you read it, it goes along. She didn't take it seriously to begin with, but I don't think most people would. They would just, oh, it's a little annoyance. It's a little this. Oh, it's actually kind of cute. They're just inept, and they don't know how to say, ask me out on a date, that kind of thing. And I think you would take it that way. And especially you're a celebrity and you're used to getting letters and notes and emails from fans and maybe gifts from fans. And, so when some flowers show up and say, I love your show and I think you're beautiful and I really love watching you on TV, where are you going to go? Oh my God, this guy's going to kill me. No, that's not the first reaction.
No.
It's, oh, I'm really flattered by this. Thank you, But that's how it begins.
You've been involved with the film industry a good deal, mainly television, right?
Right, exactly.
How do you find that? Do you find that satisfying, interesting, challenging, or just boring?
No. I find it great. I mean, but I work with a lot of novelists too, and I look at it as the same, because I only work with the writers. I've been on movie sets, and trust me, it's shoot me now. I can't spend 5 hours while they get a minute of screen time, and 99% of the time there's just people standing around and one person doing something and one person doing so. It's maddening to me. I can't sit still that long. That's why I never was very good at board games. Uh, uh, but the writers, whole different animal, very creative. Uh, and especially when you have the time constraints and the word constraints and the scene constraints that you have in either movies or TV. Remember, an hour TV show has like 42 minutes of screen time. You got to get all this story and all these things you want to do down to that. And so working with someone to help them cut through the wheat and cut through the chaff and get to the wheat and the meat of the problem and say, well, this, and this are the key elements of making this believable. And I think that because I do write fiction, that the screenwriters I've worked with like that. I'm not just a technical consultant that happens to know medicine and forensic science, because I understand storytelling too.
Mm-hmm.
And the two are different. If you're having I would say if you're having a discussion with a medical colleague, you always talk about probabilities and possibilities. And so if someone has a certain constellation of symptoms, it's probably this, but it's possibly that. And then you go investigate it. with writers, possibilities, and a little more are what you're looking for. We can push the envelope as long as we make it believable. It doesn't have to really fit the science completely. It just has to be believable. You know, we bought into Star Wars. Enough said.
Exactly. We have a question here. What is your funniest, strangest, or weirdest story about writing books or doing book signings?
um, well, a couple. I mean, book signings are an animal unto themselves. And I remember my very first book signing. It was the first book I published was a question and answer book where writers, it was called Murder and Mayhem. And it was even before I published any other nonfiction or fiction. And because writers started sending me questions from writers' conferences and stuff. So I put together these 170 questions or whatever. And so I was signing for that at the old mysterious bookstore up in Westwood, you know. And I'm thinking, you know, this is pretty cool, man. So Nan and I drove up there. And as we drive by the place there on Broxton, I guess it was on, and then you go around and park behind, you know, in the parking deck, come in the back door. There was a line of people out the door. And I'm thinking, and there's my books in the window. And I'm thinking, this is great, man. Good God, I was not expecting this. And so we go and park the car. We come in through the back door, and I go in there. The place is packed with people, and you know, people are still coming in the door and stuff. And Ray Bradbury's sitting there. And so Ray Bradbury signs for the next half hour, you know, and I'm going to come on after that. And Ray Bradbury, a very nice man. I got to meet him and talk to him for a few minutes. He was old and frail then, but I mean, he was just a very great gentleman. And he had the person there that was helping him. And they get up and leave. And then there's me and Nan and the employees. That's it.
But every author has that kind of tale.
Exactly. And then we went to one in someplace, I think down in San Diego there, and this guy kept asking questions about how to dispose of a body. And people would ask around, I'd letting people ask questions, and always after about every fourth question would go back to him, and he'd have more details he wanted to know. And after about four of them, I said, let me guess, you need to know this by Saturday night. You know? It was a little creepy, you know. We got in the car to leave, and Nan said, whoa, I don't want to live near that guy. I said, I don't either. You know? So yeah, you get some good ones. The best story I ever heard, though, was from Jeffrey Deaver. Jeffrey Deaver said I think he was in like Scottsdale, Phoenix, and he had done over for a couple of things. And he decided to pull into a Barnes and Noble, you know, to sign some stock for him, you know, what you do. And he went in there, and sure enough, there's his books, you know, and the bestseller kiosk there, you know, and everything. So he picks up one of them, and he walks over to the counter, and he hands it to the lady. He said, I'll be happy to sign some stock for you. And she said, well, who are you? He said, well, I'm Jeffrey Deaver. I wrote this book. And she said, well, how do I know it's you? So he took the book, his picture's on the back, and he held it up. And she said, well, how do I know you just don't look like it? And he said, you get a lot of author impersonators around here, do you? And she said, you'd be surprised. He just put the book down, walked out of the store.
Wasn't long on patience.
No, it just it went too far. You know, I'm sorry. I tried. Yeah.
He's probably one of the more distinctive looking people. And
Exactly.
I mean,
yeah.
And
one of the best writers I know.
Yes. And
yes.
And funny.
Yes. Oh, he's hysterical in person. You know, you may not get that from his books, but Jeffrey is a funny guy. Yeah.
Certainly not from the picture either. He looks like he's going to be very grim.
Yeah. Looks like an undertaker.
Yeah.
But he's extremely smart, and he's very personable, and got a great sense of humor.
Yeah. Another question. If this series became a movie or a TV series, who do you see playing Jake?
Oh, that's
and
easy.
Any of the other characters?
Well, Jake would be Timothy Oliphant.
Oh.
Yes. Tall, lean, good looking. Timothy Oliphant. Jake would be Timothy Oliphant. Yeah, there's no question about that. Nicole, there's nobody like Nicole. you know, some tall, beautiful blonde. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. Ray, maybe a young Russell Crowe, because Ray's kind of tough. Pancake, God, who knows? How many 6'5", 280-pound redheads do you know? But he would.
Not many.
Philip Seymour Hoffman if he was bigger. But Timothy Oliphant for Ray for Jake is definitely the one. Yeah.
And has there been any talk about something like that?
Oh, you hear stuff every now and then, but that's kind of like hearing a train go by.
If someone else has a question on here, I'm not seeing it, but what else would you like to tell us about your series? Where do you see it going?
Buy them and read them.
That's a given. That's
a given. And Anne's got them, so
definitely.
It's this series is going to keep going as long as I want it to go. The Samantha Cody series was 3 books. The Dub Walker series was 3 books. Mm-hmm. Then I wrote that little moment of insanity, those Royal Pains books. And then this is in its 5th, and I'm working on the 6th now. Mm-hmm. My Kane Harper series, there's 2 out. The 3rd one's done. We're going through editing on it now.
Okay, good.
And, and I like that series too. It's totally, I alternate. I go one back and forth because it's darker. But I love those characters too. They're fantastic. They're characters that were in my head for a decade. And finally,
before you did anything with them?
They're like I said, the next one's done, and I've already got some. I can't get the 4th one out of my head while I'm trying to finish the 3rd. That's the way it works. Yeah. I'm working on a Jake book, and I'm thinking about that one. I'm working on that one. I'm thinking about Jake. It's always that way. But I refuse to start. I just store them in my brain, and if they fall out, then they didn't need to stay anyway. I don't make too many notes and stuff because I figure if it's not going to stay with you, it's not good. And
but did I understand correctly? You said you thought about that series for that long before you ever started writing it?
Yeah, I thought about the first book in that series, and then I thought about the characters for many years. Non-biologic siblings, male, female, that are raised by a gypsy family, and then they develop skills, certain skills, and then they use those skills to take care of bad people. That vigilante type thing, but not really. They're paid to do it. And I like that idea. I like it's kind of it's Jack Reacher, really. I mean, Jack Reacher does that, and that goes back to Shane, the movie Shane. Shane's the guy that drives into town and comes into town and fixes things and leaves. And so these characters are kind of like that too, but I like their dynamic and where they came from and who they are and what their skill set is, which Jake has no skills except people like him. Whereas these characters are very skilled, and you do not want to cross their path. They will hunt you down. They will fix you by whatever means are necessary. And there's something I like that, people say, everybody's got a kill list. Trust me. If you could get away with it,
No, we can't share that though. So
no, it's personal skill list. Yes, exactly.
Do you you've done them so well, so the answer is probably no, but do you have trouble going from a light one such as the OC comparatively to your darker ones? Is there a shift? Is there something that clicks differently?
No, to me, they're just stories, and you're going to use humor in one, and you're going to use, a little more down and dirty darkness in the other, but they do spill over a little bit. I mean, there are moments where there is something a little bit humorous in the Kane Harper series, though not anywhere near as slapstick as Jake and stuff. but there's also some darkness in Jake. I mean, every book has got murders and got bad guys and got suspenseful situations. And this one maybe more than the others because, you know, the stalking thing is a big deal. It's a big deal. And it does become, you know, confrontational, if you will. But Jake's take on it, he's always a little bit standing aside. He's involved, but he's not involved. I don't really know how to put it. He just kind of looks, you know, he does things like throwing rocks at people, you know. He didn't take a gun, he just throws rocks at people, you know, and but he was a pitcher, so he can do that. But yeah.
Okay.
So no, I don't have to. In fact, I enjoy going back and forth. I think it keeps me from getting stale. Dealing with the same characters, the same type of story, month after month after month after month after month.
So what is your process? Do you have a certain time you write? Do
No,
you, what do you do? Is it just whenever?
I write when I feel like it and don't write when I don't. Just simple as that. You
Sounds
know,
way too simple. Yes.
yeah. I've had a job for 50 years. I don't want another job. And I promised myself when I started this, probably 25 years ago now, I promised myself that I would never make this a job.
Okay.
If it ever became a job, I wouldn't do it. It's fun. It's playtime. You know, where else can you sit in your pajamas and kill people early in the morning, you know, and get away with it? But now I want this to be fun, you know, and like I said, I got a job. And it's the people that I really admire are the people who write for a living and then try to write a novel, because that part of your brain has been consumed all day long. And maybe you write magazine articles, or you write for a newspaper, or you write technical stuff. I don't care what you write. Writing is your job. And then you got to sit down and do the same thing, only differently. At least mine two are so different from each other that it's a total departure. And so it's a breath of fresh air to be able to sit down and write. And some days I'll sit down and, you know, and I'll start writing. You know, I'm always up early, you know, 5:30 in the morning. It's, you know, I only need about 5 or 6 hours sleep a night anyway. So I've been that way my whole life. Um, and I'll just get up and I'll come down and answer emails and look at a couple of things. Then I'll just start writing and stuff. And sometimes, you know, a couple of hours I'm done. And sometimes next thing you know, it's almost noon. You never know. You never know. It just depends on how it's flowing. Uh, Sometimes you write a chapter that takes 3 hours to slug your way through 1,000 words.
Wow.
Sometimes in 3 hours, you've written 3,000 words. You just don't know until you sit down and start into it, and you don't know where the bumps in the road are, but there's always bumps in the road.
So what's the one that's coming up next from you that we can look forward to?
The Jake book I'm working on is called Cultured, and it has to do with not really a religious cult, but a self-help financial cult, if you will, that kind of thing. The next, I knew I was going to do this. The next, the next Kane Harper book, if I could remember the name of it, I would tell you.
Okay.
Oh, it's called Tallyman. It's amazing, you know, because I finished it 8 months ago. How do I remember the name? It's called Tallyman, and it has to do with a college professor gets killed randomly in a small town in Tennessee, and it turns out his mother is the ambassador to NATO.
Oh.
And so Kane and Harper are contacted and brought in to find out who killed him, and it turns out there's a whole nother story.
So is that the next one that will?
That's the Tallyman is the next Kane Harper book. Yes.
And when?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Approximately.
Yeah. John and Shannon won't tell me. Shannon's working on the edits right now, but they're usually pretty quick once we get through the edits. The Suspense Publishing, so they're usually very quick once we get the editing done.
So we can look forward to having you back for
Absolutely.
another set of characters and another thing. Does anyone have any questions that they didn't type? If you want to unmute and ask, you're more than welcome to.
Oh, somebody said, how important is location? Everything. The story changes by where it is. You know, The Godfather couldn't happen anywhere but New York, maybe New Jersey. Um,
Definitely
you
New
know,
Jersey.
Jaws had to be on at the beach, preferably on an island because it's more isolated. Star Wars happened in space. You know, things just have to happen where they are. You can't put them somewhere. You can't shoehorn them into an illogical location. And then the
Right.
location is a character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Elmore Leonard, one of his, you know, the 10 rules of writing is don't start with the weather. Well, he didn't tell James Lee Burke that, because I bet 75% of his chapters start with the weather. And why? Because it is a character. The milieu, the feeling, the ambiance of where this story takes place is critical to that story. So location has everything to do with it. Everything to do with it.
So why the Gulf Coast?
Well, I'm from Alabama,
Oh.
so yeah, I grew up in Huntsville, but so the Gulf Coast, you know, I wanted to set it in the South. A lot of my stories are set in the South, actually, uh, because there's a great storytelling tradition there, and there's great characters there, and there's great food, you know, and it's just a very rich environment for storytelling, you know. And if you go back through history, all the great Southern writers, you know, I mean, obviously Faulkner comes up, but James Dickey and Tennessee Williams, I mean, all the great Southern writers, they're really Rick Bragg, fantastic. Um, you know, it's just great storytelling, you know. And then people say, well, where'd that come from? And I said, well, first of all, you got to understand that the South was really populated by the Scotch and the Irish and the Appalachian Trail. And what they do, they drank and told stories. I mean, you know, that's pretty much what it was. But also, if you go back 150 years ago, there weren't any books. There weren't any electricity. They worked. They worked out on the farm. They worked on the plantation. They worked whatever they worked at. They tilled the fields. They did stuff. They had to grow crops to live. And they were farmers. They were very, you know, agrarian society. They had really no amenities at all. And I remember in Melinda today, we go to my great grandparents' house. They lived in Tupelo, Mississippi. They had an outhouse.
Dirt front yard.
Yeah, they had an outhouse. They had an outhouse. Yeah, we were kids. They had an
It
outhouse.
was awful.
Yeah, it was terrible. But it was a two-holer, so you know you could talk to somebody while you're there. But anyway, and they had chickens and they had cows and they had pigs and they had all this stuff. So, you know, and that's how it was. But there were no televisions and radios and all that stuff. And people sat around at dinner or at the fireplace at night and told stories because it came from the tradition from hundreds of years earlier. And I think that's why Southerners are great storytellers. And so I wanted to set it down there in that location because the stories I wanted to tell are have very Southern overtones.
Even though you grew up there and lived there for years, do you go back for a refresher to when you are writing something set there for to get the ambiance of what's going on?
Sometimes, I mean, in the actually the first Kane Harper book is they're located in Nashville. That's where they hang out. But it was down toward Franklin and Leaper's Fork in areas just south of Nashville, and then Timms Ford Lake, which is a lake right in the middle of Tennessee that's like 167 miles long. And a friend of mine I grew up with, Charlie, they have a house right there on the lake, and we stayed with them. So I made this imaginary town at the western end of the lake. It's close to Lynchburg, you know, where Jack Daniels comes from. So why not? So so I created that. So yeah, you know, I do use things that I know or things that I've been to or things, you know, or if not, you know, you call on your childhood and you call on your memories and you call on all that. But yeah, you know, it's my Dub Walker series, of course, was set in Huntsville, which is, you know, where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's a whole different place now than when I grew up. You know, when we were there, it was 35,000 people. Now the metropolitan area is probably 250,000, and it's about to be the largest city in Alabama.
Wow.
Space
Amazing.
program, high-tech space program. It's one of the most high-tech areas in the world. It's amazing what's come into there. You name it,
Silicon
every
Valley of the
big
South.
aerospace industry, it's there. Boeing, Thiokol, Northrop Grumman, you name it, they have huge headquarters there because that's where von Braun settled, and that's where the space program grew from. which we grew up with, building rockets in the backyard. Melinda was our chief ignition officer. Every time we built a rocket, we made her be the ignition officer.
I was too stupid and young to know the difference.
Yeah.
And I could blow myself up.
Yeah, the ignition officer was to light the mayonnaise jar lid that had gasoline in it that would then light the rocket and run away.
God.
So we made her be the ignition officer.
They could have
Of
killed
course,
you.
our parents did not know about this
Of course not.
until a few years ago.
And is this an older brother? Or where do you fall in the family?
She's the youngest.
Oh,
He's 4 years older than I am.
Yeah.
so you knew who you were pushing that onto.
Yeah, exactly.
I love
Well,
it.
let's get Melinda to do it. She'll do it. It's no problem.
Yeah, for her big brother, of course.
Yeah. And we're lucky we didn't kill all of us,
I know.
because we would empty out shotgun shells to get gunpowder. We'd take match heads. And I remember a guy up the street even brought us a thing about the size of a softball of solid propellant. His father was a scientist out at NASA, and he brought us some solid propellant. And I remember it was greasy and smelled bad and leathery, and you had to strip it off. And so we loaded one of our rockets with that, and we never saw it again. It went out of sight. It's probably in another county. Yeah.
Oh boy.
I missed
yeah.
that one.
We're lucky we didn't kill each other. I mean, it was just crazy.
Yeah, really. Lucky you
But-
made it through childhood.
Yeah. But I wouldn't give it up for anything, man. Little League Baseball, the ground starts shaking, and it'd stop this whole timeout, and everybody stands, flares. Everybody would look to the south. You see a big steam cloud come up. It's just Von Braun testing another rocket. It'd last about 2.5 minutes, and then it would settle down. Okay, play ball. I thought everybody did that as a kid.
Well, we're certainly glad you survived childhood.
Yeah,
So you can
thank you.
tell us all these great stories.
Yeah, and remember what I don't know, I make up.
That I believe, yes.
Yeah.
Well, look forward to having you back for the next book, Doug.
Anytime, you know
It's
that.
always a pleasure. And
Always
hopefully that one will be in the store. And
the
we'll
next one. Oh, yeah.
really hope that we can be in good enough shape to do that by that time.
You want me to stop by and sign some stuff for you?
Yes, in a few days, not right away.
Yeah, just let me know, and we'll come up there and do it. And it's always a good excuse to go up into Orange.
Yeah, it's special.
It's a great neighborhood. Great neighborhood.
Good food.
Oh yeah. The circle there's fantastic.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doug.
Thank
This
you
was
all. Thank you all.
Really
Thank you.
enjoyed it. We'll see you soon.
All
Loved
right.
it. Thank you.
Bye
Thanks,
bye.
everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye now.